What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on the BMW E60 5 Series today. Now then, I'm not too sure how many of you guys have saw my previous video where I replaced the brake discs and pads on this car, but I replaced them for some M-Tech discs and pads, and they perform very, very well. Now, I also mentioned that I wanted to do a brake fluid flush sometime soon as well. And that's what I'm going to be doing today. But not only am I going to be doing a brake fluid flush, I'm also going to be removing the standard rubber brake hoses and replacing them with some nice new steel braided ones. Now, M-Tech have actually sent me out their braided steel hoses. So these are what I am going to be installing today. And along with those, they've actually sent me out 4 nice new shiny bleed nipples. Now these are actually not your standard regular bleed nipples. These are called speed bleed nipples, and as the name suggests, they make things a whole lot quicker and actually easier, because these have a very special design where they let fluid out of them, but they cannot let air back into them. So usually you would have one person pumping the brake pedal, and then you would have one person to open and close the bleed nipple. But with these installed, all you need to do is open the bleed nipple. You can just pump the brakes on your own. Fluid will come out, but nothing will then go back through here. So it makes things a whole lot easier. So I'm going to be installing 4 new bleed nipples today. And like I mentioned as well, we are going to be doing a full brake fluid flush, and we are going to be doing that with M-Tech's performance brake fluid. Now this is essentially just DOT 5.1 brake fluid, but how this is different to DOT 4 brake fluid, which is actually what's recommended for this car, is it has a higher boiling temperature. Now I've mentioned before that I actually want to take this car to the Nürburgring this year. So it's probably just as well that I do have some higher performing brake fluid, because, you know, brake fluid can get fairly hot. So we're just ensuring that we have the best possible brake fluid available. So we're going to be doing a full flush with that today. And of course, if you do want to get yourself any of these parts, I will leave the links down below in the description box. But without further ado, let's get outside and let's get cracking. Okay then, so now that we have the car off the ground, all of the wheels are off, this is what we're going to be replacing today then. So this is the brake line here, and it connects to this hose here, and that runs down here behind the strut, joins in there, and then goes back down there into the back of the caliper. So we're going to be replacing this rubber hose today, and then we will be replacing the bleed nipple, which is underneath that cover there. So to do that, we're going to have to take the caliper off and then disconnect the brake hose from the caliper, and also unscrew the old bleed nipples out. So first thing we need to do is take this clip off at the front and take both of these slide bolts out. Let's take the clip off. Next thing I'm going to do is actually get the brake pad wear sensor out the way. So that just goes over the bleed nipple. That should just pull out of the pad like that. Tuck that out of the way. Now the next thing I'm doing is removing both of the caliper slide bolts, which holds the caliper to the caliper bracket. You just have to remove these black caps, they cover the bolts, and then it's just a 7mm Allen bolt. I think actually what I'm going to do before I remove the caliper is actually undo this hose on the back, because they can be pretty tight. That's a 14mm spanner you need. Just going to undo it. There we go. That's loose now. That should come off fairly easy once I have the caliper off. And once you've undone the slide bolts, the caliper should be able to be lifted off. I'm just going to take the pads out. There we go. And then what we need to do next is remove the hose from the back of the caliper. So I need to position a pan so the brake fluid can run into it. Okay then, so we have our catch bucket. I'm just gonna, should be able to twist this off now. I should be able to, because I didn't do it up tight. I just need to knock it loose again with a 14mm spanner. There we go. Just twist the caliper off the brake hose. There we go, and just leave that to drip in there. And now what we need to do is remove the brake hose from the car. So it's just the rubber part is pushed in there, and then we just need to disconnect it from the main brake lines then. And then to disconnect the brake hose from the main brake line, all you need is an 11mm spanner. Now I would recommend using a brake line spanner just because you've got less chance of rounding the nut. But all you have to do is get the spanner on that nut and then undo. And then when it's loose enough, should be able to undo it by hand, and then the brake hose should come out the top just like that. And what we're going to do is position our new brake hose in, and then just screw that up. And then once you're all done up nice and tight, you should no longer see brake fluid dripping from here, but from the end of the new hose. And then what we're going to do in the meantime is get the caliper ready and install the new bleed nipple. So this should be an 11mm. So let's just remove the old one. There we go. And then let's install the new one. And that's the new bleed nipple on. And now all we need to do is install the brake hose into the caliper, which has a much better design on the brake hose because you can actually turn the nut on the hose as opposed to having to turn the entire caliper. Let's just twist that round. There we go. And then once that's in, all we need to do is reinstall the pads and the wear sensor if you have one, which this side does have one. So I'm just going to do that, and we can then fit the caliper back onto the bracket. And then with the clip back on the front, that is this one, done. And now we'll move on to the rear then, so pretty much the same, just remove this clip at the front, like that. Okay then, so next thing to do is to loosen the brake hose on the caliper and also loosen the bleed nipple just to make it easier while it's still on the car. It's going to be a lot harder to do it once the caliper is free and it's you've got nothing to lever against. Then what I'm going to do is remove both of the slide bolts just to remove the caliper away from the bracket, and then obviously we can go ahead and take the hose off then. Caliper should now come free, as it does. Just leave that to dangle. Wouldn't usually, because obviously it's putting stress on the hose, but because we're changing the hose, it's no problem. We'll remove the brake pads. And then we'll just unscrew the caliper off the brake hose. There we go. That should now drip, as it does. And now we can proceed with removing the hose from the brake line. So we'll just hold the top nut still and in place with a 11mm brake line spanner, and then we'll just undo this one. We've already cracked it loose, so this should just now just twist off. There we go, and that's up done. And we'll get our new brake hose and slot this into place. There we go then, that's the new brake hose on. Just got to connect the caliper to that then now. But first we need to install our new bleed nipple. So we've removed the old one. We just need to screw the new one in. Make sure I've got it the right way around. So that's it, yeah, bleed nipple's always at the top. Now all we need to do is connect the brake hose up onto the caliper, and that just screws in like that. And now all we need to do is reinstall the pads and then fit the caliper back onto the bracket. And with both of the slide bolts done up, we can then just reinstall this clip. Okay then, so that is one of the rears done with the new braided steel hose and the new speed bleed nipple. And I've actually went ahead and done the same on the other side. So that is the other rear, and this is the other front. Okay then, so now that all of the new hoses and bleed nipples are installed, the next thing we need to do is a brake fluid flush. And obviously there's going to be a lot of air in the system now, so we need to do a full thorough flush. Now first thing I'm going to do, because obviously we've lost quite a lot of fluid, is fill the reservoir up to the max. Now if you want to know how to access the reservoir on the E60, it's very, very easy. All you need to do is remove the cabin filter air box, and then underneath that there is just a tray which you just need to undo with I think it's 3 or 4 13mm lock nuts. They just lock in. There we go, that's brimmed to the top. Now I'm just going to pump the brake pedal just to build up a bit of pressure. And then I'm going to start at the furthest away from the master cylinder. So the master cylinder is over there. So this is the furthest corner away. I'm just going to crack loose the bleed nipple with a 11mm spanner. Okay then, so that is this one done. We've got fresh new fluid coming to this caliper. Let's move around, let's do the next rear one. And now that the rears are done, it's time to move on to the fronts. And now it's just the final caliper, which is just below the brake master cylinder. And now that the final corner is done, all that's left to do is top the reservoir up to the max mark. Okay then guys, so just got back from a nice long test drive then. My braking now is honestly so much better. Before, I had to like push the brake pedal down halfway before I got any kind of braking. Now it is pretty much right from the top of the pedal. This is obviously because I was in desperate need of a brake fluid flush. Now obviously it's very hard to tell if there is any difference with the upgraded hoses and the upgraded fluid, but this is something that is going to come into play when it comes to taking this thing on track. Like I've mentioned before, I do plan on taking this car to the Nürburgring later this year, and it's just nice to know that this car is one step closer to being ready for that. Now I just want to apologise for having to rush the brake fluid flush for you guys. It was honestly just getting so dark, but there is a couple of things that I do want to mention now. And one of those things is when you are doing a brake fluid flush, do not let the brake fluid itself go below the minimum on the brake fluid reservoir. That can cause a whole load of problems and you do not want to go there. So just keep making sure that you're topping up the reservoir as required. Now another thing I want to mention is when you're doing the flush for each corner, you basically know that you are done once the brake fluid turns clear and there are no air bubbles coming out. If there are still air bubbles coming out, there's obviously still air in the system, and that means that you still need to continue pumping the brake pedal and then flushing more fluid out. But apart from that, I think you guys kind of get the gist. If, of course, you have any questions, do not hesitate, just leave them down below in the comment section. Of course, if you do want to get yourself any of these products that I've used today, like the braided steel hoses, the brake fluid, and the speed bleed nipples, which I very much so recommend, that made the brake fluid flush so much easier. Of course, I will leave the links down in the description below. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please give this video a like if you have enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below. Subscribe if you have not already done so. And I'll see you guys in that next video. Peace!